Good day, everyone. My name is Kehinde C Mofolorunsho. It is my pleasure to be part of this year's Global Congress on Infectious Diseases organized by SciTech Central Incorporated. It is indeed an honor for me to present using this platform. Our research is titled Neisseria, gonorrhoea, and Chlamydia trachomatis infections among men who have sex with men living in South Africa. Sexually transmitted infections are very common and are of major public health concern. In 2020, an estimated 374 million new cases, with one of four curable sexually transmitted infections, was reported. These included 129 million chlamydia cases, 82 million gonorrhoea cases, 156 million trichomonas cases, and 7.1 million syphilis cases. This was according to the World Health Organization. In Africa, gonorrhea and chlamydia accounted for 11.4 million and 12 million new cases per year, respectively. These sexually transmitted infections increases the risk of infection with the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, particularly in men who have sex with men. Men who have sex with men have in recent years become the group at highest risk of acquiring sexually transmitted infections. This is usually due to their sexual network or behaviors, which results in rectal and urethral infections. Available data have shown that this key population are affected by high burden of sexually transmitted infections worldwide. And in Africa, the prevalence of gonorrhea and chlamydia infections in this subgroup have been reported to be between 1% and 23%. Despite significant research regarding sexually transmitted infections among African men who have sex with men, access to this subgroup in many countries of Africa remains generally difficult due to stigma and discrimination, making sexually transmitted infections data among this group scarce. South Africa is no exception, and for this reason, we investigated the prevalence of gonorrhea and chlamydia among South African men who have sex with men. We also assessed risk factors associated with these sexually transmitted infections, including barriers and facilitators to care. Methods. This cross-sectional study, including all laboratory assays, were conducted at the School of Clinical Medicine Research Laboratory of the Nelson Mandela School of Medicine at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. 200 participants were recruited from the King Edward Hospital and the Aurum Institute, both located in Durban, South Africa. Participants were sexually active men 18 years and older. 10 ml of midstream urine sample was collected and analyzed for the presence of Neisseria, gonorrhoea, and Chlamydia trachomatis. Participants' data were collected at enrollment using a self-administered questionnaire. Laboratory testing included DNA extraction and polymerase chain reaction amplification. Using commercially available kit, the DNA was extracted from sample pellets according to the manufacturer's protocol. For the polymerase chain reaction amplification, the Quant Studio 5 real-time PCR detection system was used. The applied biosystems Tachman assays were used for C. trachomatis and Neisseria gonorrhoea detection. Statistical analysis included univariable and adjusted multivariable logistic regression models. These were run for Chlamydia trachomatis and Neisseria gonorrhoeae to test for associations with the explanatory variables. Level of significance was set at 5% and 10% with 95% confidence interval. Results from this study show that the prevalence of Chlamydia trachomatis and Neisseria gonorrhoeae in the studied population were 6% and 3% respectively. About 39% of the participants who tested positive for Neisseria gonorrhoeae and Chlamydia trachomatis infections were asymptomatic. Table 1 shows factors that were significantly associated with testing positive for Chlamydia trachomatis, while Table 2 shows those significantly associated with testing positive for Neisseria gonorrhoeae. One can see from Table 1 that the majority of men who tested positive for Chlamydia trachomatis were between ages 25 and 30 years old. This was significant. A high percentage of the men reported engaging in anal sex only in the past 30 days, while 25% had engaged in both oral and anal sex. This had a borderline significance at 0.054. There was an equal proportion of men who were circumcised in the Chlamydia trachomatis positive group. This was also significant. In Table 2, an equal proportion of men who tested positive for Neisseria gonorrhoeae had attended high school and university, and this was significant. 66.7% of men who have sex with men engaged in oral sex, and 33.3% had engaged in anal sex. This was significant at 0.034. In addition, a high proportion of men frequently engaged in group sex. This was also significant. Age, circumcision, and number of sex partners were significantly associated with the risk for Chlamydia trachomatis infection. According to the univariate analysis, being between the ages of 30 and 39 years old reduced the risk of acquiring Chlamydia trachomatis infection. After performing further adjustments in the multivariable model, being circumcised reduced the risk of infection. Having between 2 to 4 sex partners in the past 30 days increased the risk of testing positive for Chlamydia trachomatis. Almost half of the men were afraid to visit healthcare centers due to stigma. The majority of men who had sex with men reported that having a trusted healthcare facility would encourage them to access care. The following conclusions were drawn from the results of this study. 1. That Chlamydia trachomatis is the most prevalent bacterial sexually transmitted infection among South African men who have sex with men. This finding is in consonance with a previous study conducted in South Africa. 2. Being young was significantly associated with testing positive for Chlamydia trachomatis. 3. Engaging in group sex was significantly associated with testing positive for Neisseria gonorrhoeae. 4. Anal and oral sex were significantly associated with testing positive for Neisseria gonorrhoea and Chlamydia trachomatis. In, in conclusion, our study showed that being circumcised reduced the risk of chlamydia in trachomatis infection. I would, on behalf of my colleagues, like to appreciate the management and staff of King Edward Hospital and the Orem Institute for their support. Thank you for your attention.